When Karen arrived with her fake HOA enforcers ready to storm my house, she thought she'd finally cornered me. She claimed it was all community justice and sent her cronies charging forward to break down my door, shouting orders and flashing their toy radios. But Karen didn't realize her theatrical stunt was about to expose her in the worst way, an outrageous impersonation scheme caught red-handed. Beneath the facade of authority lay nothing but fraud, and she was utterly unprepared for the real badge that would end her charade. Karen arrived early that morning, her convoy of cheap uniforms and plastic badges rumbling down the street like a parade of misplaced power. I watched from my front window as she stepped out of her sleek SUV, clipboard clenched tightly and confidence radiating from every pore. She was dressed to intimidate. Tailored blazer, sharply creased pants, and oversized sunglasses that barely hid the gleam of malice in her eyes. What Karen didn't know, as her fake officers stormed my home, was that I was ready for her. And this time, her chaos would unravel in front of everyone. They pounded on my front door like a battering ram, the relentless noise echoing through the house. My pulse quickened, and for a moment, I almost forgot who I was, an FBI director with decades of experience facing high-stakes situations. But something about this so-called HOA police felt distinctly off. I'd lived in dozens of neighborhoods across the country during my career, and never had I encountered an HOA dispatching uniformed officers. Making my way to the door, I navigated around unpacked boxes and half-assembled furniture, reminders that I'd been in this neighborhood for less than a month. This was supposed to be my quiet corner of suburbia, a brief respite before retirement. Yet here I was, opening the door to confront two men in pressed Navy uniforms, each wearing oversized gold emblems that spelled out neighborhood enforcement. "Can I help you?" I asked politely, masking the irritation bubbling under the surface. The tall man straightened his glasses and cleared his throat. "We're from the HOA police," he announced, his voice quivering slightly like he was reciting lines from a script. "We've received multiple complaints that you failed to comply with yard maintenance standards. This is a formal warning." I almost laughed out loud, but years of professionalism kept my expression neutral. Yard maintenance standards? I'd just moved in. The grass was barely over 2 inches tall. Since when did an HOA dispatch pseudo-police to someone's door for lawn talk? "Formal warning, you say?" I replied, crossing my arms. "That sounds serious." "It is," the mustached man chimed in, his tone curt. "We're authorized to issue citations, fines, and, if necessary, proceed with enforcement." His directness struck me as unusual. HOAs usually send polite letters or passive-aggressive emails, not uniformed goons. Everything about this felt staged, like an amateur performance. The oversized emblems, the heavy-handed threats, their stilted delivery, all of it rang false. I offered a tight smile. "Well, gentlemen, I'd love to see the specific clause in the HOA bylaws that mentions this type of enforcement. Perhaps you could show me your IDs or a business card? I don't recall seeing either of you at the last association meeting." The two men exchanged a quick glance. The mustached man cleared his throat. "IDs are privileged. We have official documents, but they're not for your eyes. We have the authority to issue a fine of $1,000 for non-compliance." I inhaled slowly, letting silence stretch between us. My right hand twitched instinctively, itching to reach into my pocket for my badge. Flashing my credentials, marking me as a Federal Bureau of Investigation director, would have scared them off instantly if they were petty conmen. But I decided against it. Too brash. I wanted to see just how far they'd take this charade. "That's a stiff fine," I said, feigning concern. "All because of an unkempt yard?" "Rules are rules," the tall man replied, his voice gaining confidence. "We suggest you pay immediately. We'll collect it in person to spare you any hassle." Their nerve was almost admirable. Impersonating HOA authorities to scam homeowners wasn't a new scheme, but doing it in person, in fake uniforms, was bold. Leaning against the door frame, I kept my tone casual. "Why don't we do this by the book? I'll confirm everything with the HOA board. Could you wait while I grab the community guidelines?" The mustached man cut me off sharply. "We're not here to debate bylaws. Failure to cooperate means immediate suspension of your privileges and possible arrest." "Arrest?" I echoed, arching an eyebrow. "That's a bit extreme. Since when does an HOA have the authority to arrest people?" The tall man smirked, shrugging condescendingly. When you signed a contract to move here, you gave us that power. Now hand over the payment or we'll escalate matters. I nodded slowly, pretending to comply. Of course. Let me grab my checkbook. The moment the door clicked shut, I headed straight to my home office. Inside was my sturdy metal filing cabinet, still locked tight from the move. My pulse thudded as I unlocked the top drawer, rifling past classified files, redacted reports, and personal memorabilia until I found my leather credential case. Nestled securely inside was my FBI badge. Not the kind of thing I'd planned to use in a neighborly dispute, but here we were. My gut told me these weren't casual grifters. In my experience, anyone bold enough to run a face-to-face scam in broad daylight had at least a pinch of recklessness. And reckless criminals were often the most dangerous. Before stepping back outside, I paused. Flashing my badge might scare them off, or escalate things. For now, I'd keep my cards close and let them dig their own graves. These men had no idea who they were dealing with. And Karen? She was about to learn that rules worked both ways. Sorry to keep you waiting, I said, feigning politeness. I couldn't find my checkbook. Maybe we can set up an electronic transfer? Cash only, the mustached man barked, his tone sharp and unyielding. No checks, no electronic trail. He caught himself mid-sentence, quickly adding, HOA policy. That slip of the tongue was all I needed to confirm my suspicions. These two weren't here on official business. They were improvising, hoping to intimidate me into handing over untraceable cash. Interesting, I mused, keeping my tone neutral. I never knew HOAs could be so discreet with their finances. The mustached man's eyes narrowed as he thrust a clipboard toward me. Sign here. We can settle this quickly. You want to keep your privileges in the neighborhood, don't you? I pretended to examine the form, noting the grammatical errors, mismatched fonts, and the faint watermark that read sample document across the background. It was laughably amateurish, but I kept my amusement hidden behind a stoic nod. Just then, the door across the street creaked open, and my elderly neighbor Curtis stepped onto his porch, watering can in hand. He paused, his gaze lingering on the scene unfolding on my doorstep. For a fleeting moment, I considered calling out to him, asking him to snap a photo or record a video, but that might tip off the pair standing in front of me. Instead, I shot Curtis a friendly wave as if to say, "Everything's fine," and turned back to my visitors. A chime sounded from my phone in the other room, likely a spam message or a receipt from the moving company. Still, it gave me an idea. "Let me grab my phone," I said, keeping my tone light. "If I can't find cash, maybe I can text someone for help. Don't want to break any rules." The mustached man's lips curled into a sneer. "Make it quick." I shut the door and headed to the living room, where my phone sat on the coffee table next to a mug of coffee I'd barely touched. The text was from a bureau contact, confirming a routine debrief. Smirking, I opened the camera app and switched to video mode. If I could record even a snippet of these con men demanding cash, I'd have enough evidence to build a local case against them, without blowing my cover as an FBI director. I pressed record and padded back to the door, glancing at the screen to ensure it was capturing everything. A thought crossed my mind. Should I wait and see if they tried to force entry? Documenting a crime in real time was often the best approach for prosecuting fraud, but I didn't want to let this escalate beyond my control. When I opened the door again, the pair glared at me, shifting on their feet. The tall one spoke first, his voice tinged with impatience. "We don't have all day." I puffed out a casual breath. "Gentlemen, I have reason to believe you're not who you say you are. You claim to represent the HOA, but your documents—" "We are who we say we are," the mustached man hissed, stepping forward. "And we're going to arrest you if you don't comply right now." I withdrew my real badge from my back pocket, flipping it open with practiced precision. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," I stated, my voice low and steady. "You want to arrest me? An FBI director? You're going to have to try a whole lot harder than that." Their reactions were priceless. Wide eyes, parted lips, all bravado draining from their faces in an instant. They froze, as though the ground had cracked beneath them. The tall one mumbled, "Nobody said anything about the FBI." His voice quivered, his panic poorly masked. "If by job you mean impersonating police officers and threatening residents with phony arrests, Then yes, you're doing it splendidly, I replied coolly. Now put your hands where I can see them. The mustached man's face twitched, his fists clenching so tightly his knuckles turned white. Listen, we can explain. I'll bet you can, I cut him off. There's a local station house just a few miles from here. We can have a friendly conversation there. I'm sure the detective on duty would love to hear your story. A bead of sweat rolled down the mustached man's brow. Wait, let's be reasonable, he stammered, throwing a glance at the tall one, who looked like a caged fox ready to bolt. No need to drag in the authorities. We can work something out. After all, you know how these neighborhoods can be about small infractions. You're joking, I said, stepping forward. You think I'd pay a fraudulent fine after showing you my FBI badge? Could be a misunderstanding. Maybe we got the wrong address. Sure, I drawled. And you just happened to come with a half-baked contract demanding cash-only payments. Give me a break. Still filming discreetly on my phone, I gestured for them to back away from my doorway and step onto the lawn. If they made any sudden moves, like pulling a weapon, there would at least be some space between us. I want you both to kneel on the grass, hands behind your heads, I ordered, my voice steely. The tall one stared at me, paralyzed. The mustached man scowled, glancing around as though seeking an escape route. Across the street, Curtis was still loitering on his porch, phone in hand, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. The conmen had no idea their scam had just unraveled in spectacular fashion, and Karen? She was about to learn that her little scheme had backfired in the worst way possible. Curtis couldn't hear the conversation from his porch, but his frown spoke volumes. If anything went sideways, I hoped he'd already started dialing 911. Taking a deep breath, I snapped, "Kneel, hands behind your heads." Reluctantly, the men complied. The mustached one dropped first, awkwardly lowering himself onto the grass, and the tall one followed, wobbling as though his legs couldn't quite support his lanky frame. Their postures screamed discomfort, but I wasn't about to let them off easy. Inching closer, I examined them for weapons. On the mustached man's belt was a flimsy pair of handcuffs, the cheap kind you'd expect to find in a Halloween costume aisle. The tall one had a small pepper spray canister clipped to his side, but there were no firearms in sight. Small mercies. I exhaled, letting some tension slip from my shoulders. "Impersonating a law enforcement officer is a serious crime," I said firmly, standing over them. "You're looking at federal charges. In case you weren't aware, you have the right to remain silent." But before I could finish, the mustached man bolted. In one swift, desperate motion, he surged to his feet, shoving me aside with surprising force. My phone nearly slipped from my grasp, but I managed to hold on. His partner, sensing an opportunity, scrambled to his feet as well, and before I could stop them, they were sprinting across the yard, making a beeline for the cul-de-sac. "Call the police!" I shouted to Curtis, who was already fumbling with his phone. I jogged after the pair, my phone still recording. They stumbled as they ran, glancing over their shoulders every few steps to see if I was closing in. Their getaway was clumsy and frantic, amateurish, but they were gaining distance. At the end of the cul-de-sac, a battered sedan idled at the curb, its engine rattling like a tin can. From the silhouette in the driver's seat, I could see a third figure, a woman revving the engine anxiously, causing the vehicle to bounce slightly on its worn suspension. The tall man yanked the passenger door open, and the two of them clambered in, their feet tangling in the rush. The mustached man lost a shoe in the chaos, leaving it behind on the pavement like a monument to their ineptitude. The sedan screeched away, tires squealing as it tore down the street. It ignored a stop sign, swerved around a corner, and narrowly avoided mowing over a neighbor's flower bed before vanishing from sight. Breathing heavily, I slowed to a stop, my phone still recording. It was over, at least for now. Trudging back to my house, I replayed the last few moments in my mind. My eyes scanned the footage, catching a glimpse of the sedan's license plate. J4C. Something. The rest was obscured by mud or peeling paint, but it was a start. Curtis approached me, his face creased with concern. His phone was still clutched tightly in his hand. "The 911 operator says officers are on their way. Are you okay?" I nodded, still riding the adrenaline rush. "Yeah, thanks for calling them. I've got video of the whole thing. Should help us ID them." Curtis glanced down at the FBI badge still in my hand, his eyebrows shooting up. "Did I hear that right? You're FBI?" "Long story," I replied, tucking the badge into my pocket. "I'll explain when the local PD gets here." The commotion drew a small crowd, including the HOA president, an older woman named Patricia. She looked appalled, shaking her head in disbelief. "We don't even have a security patrol, let alone an HOA police force," she exclaimed. "This is outrageous!" After everyone cleared out, I grabbed a folding chair from my garage and set it up on the porch. The sun dipped below the horizon, streaking the sky with soft oranges and purples. I hoped for a moment to relax, but my mind was restless, replaying the day's events on a loop. Pulling out my phone, I reviewed the footage. The mustached man's face was crystal clear, his partner's half-turned but still identifiable. The sedan might have been rattling and beat up, but its plate and unique wear could be enough to trace it, especially with forensic enhancement. As I prepared to put my phone away, it buzzed in my hand. A blocked number flashed across the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Director," a familiar, raspy voice greeted me. "We got a development on the local front. Heard about your run-in with those impersonators. Are you all right?" It was a colleague from the bureau, someone who knew precisely who I was, and who was likely keeping tabs on me even during my so-called retirement. Part of me was annoyed that word had spread so fast, but another part was relieved to know my team still had my back. "I'm fine," I said, leaning back in the chair. "But those guys got away. The local PD is on it, but I can't just let them roam free." "We understand," my colleague replied. "This might not be an isolated incident. We've received scattered reports of similar scams in other states. Uniform impersonation, intimidation, quick getaways. No direct connections yet, but the pattern is suspicious. If you've got footage or intel, we'd appreciate a copy." "I'll send it tonight," I promised. "Keep me posted on what you find." We hung up, and I sighed, the weight of the day settling on my shoulders. So much for an uneventful retirement. But truthfully, I felt a spark of excitement. I'd seen enough criminals locked away to know that crooks like these rarely stopped unless someone forced them to. Rising from my chair, I began a slow patrol around the yard. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. My phone buzzed again, a text from Curtis. "Wanted to check on you. Hope you're okay. This has been a wild night. Just when I thought the biggest drama around here was forming a pickleball team." I couldn't help but smile. Despite everything, there was something endearing about this little community. Maybe, just maybe, I'd grow to like it here after all. The sedan vanished around the bend, its taillights flickering briefly before fading into the distance. I stayed rooted to the spot, staring up at the night sky, where stars were just beginning to peek through the gradient of dusk. Their steady, unchanging glow felt like a silent promise that no matter the chaos of the day, the world would keep turning. My phone rang, the screen flashing a local number. When I answered, a gruff voice introduced himself. "Detective Alvarez, County Sheriff's Department. We ran a search on the partial plate you gave us. Got a possible match to a car registered just out of town. We'll need more to go on before we can request a warrant, but it's a start." "I'll forward you my footage," I offered, already heading inside. "It's not the highest resolution, but it should be enough to identify who's who." "That'd be great," Alvarez replied. "We'll be in touch." Karen was livid, her voice piercing through the air like a siren. "You think you're above the rules, don't you?" she yelled, her face flushed with anger. "You think you can just ignore the HOA and do whatever you please? That's not how it works in my neighborhood." Her clipboard shook in her hand as she jabbed it toward me like it was a weapon. "You're out of compliance, you're disrespecting the community, and frankly, you don't belong here." I opened my mouth to reply, but she didn't let me. "Don't even try to justify it. I've read the rules backward and forward, and I know I'm right. You can argue all you want, but it won't change the fact that you're breaking every regulation in the book." Karen's fury intensified, her tone dripping with disdain. "You think you can undermine the HOA? You're not going to get away with this!" She pointed directly at me, her eyes blazing. "Mark my words, this isn't over, not by a long shot."